Okay, good morning. So we are doing today, it's Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. We are at the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, the very last two lines. So the pasuk told us, "Vayokutsu mipnei bnei Yisrael," right? The Egyptians, they were very very disgusted. They were very afraid of the Jewish people. So the Gemara explains. They saw the Jewish people as thorns, right? The Jews were multiplying in such a manner and becoming so scary to them that the Imam saw them as a lot of thorns. As we turn the page now to Yud Aleph and Beis, the Mitzvim were working the Jews very hard. So the Gemara explains, what does it mean, Befarach? Rabbi Amar Bepeh Rach. The farach could be sort of split into two as being a soft voice. What does it mean, a soft voice? So Rashi explains, Mashkim b'dvarim u'peschar ad gilum la'avodah. When the work first started, it wasn't you're a servant on day one, you're a slave on day one. On day one, you get paid. On day one, Pari, remember, was wearing the brick mold. On day one, in order to sort of get the people to adjust, you had to make it something good for the state, a benefit for the people. You had to do something that was going to be inspiring to get the Jews to be willing to work like that. So they did it with words. They did it by making it something that was a common good, and they did it with money. That's what it means befarach. Don't right. The pasuk tells us there in the beginning of Shema two times befarach. One it says by Avidas b'nei Yisrael befarach, and then another time it says it's kol avodas masher avdu b'hem befarach. There's two times it says farach. The Gemara darshaning that the first time, at least when it says befarach, it meant beperach, with a soft mouth, meaning do it softly, slowly, get them adjusted. Bishmu bar Nachmani Amar bepricha. It means crushing. That pashat. What does befarach mean? It means something that's very challenging, something that's difficult. Rashi explains what does it mean bepricha b'shivra and guf, right? With breaking of the body, right? Umasnayim v'chazaka, right? It means giving, doing it in a hard way, not something simple. Continues the Gemara. Vayamaru es chayei ma'avodah kasha. So the next pasuk tells us that they embittered their lives and made it very very difficult. B'chomer uvilvenim, right? They made them build all the bricks for the cities. So Amar Rava B'tchila B'chaymer Uvilvenim. If you look in the pasuk, what does the pasuk say? V'yimar Eschayim B'avodah Kasher B'chaymer Uvilvenim B'chol Avodah Basada. Right? Eis Kol Avodah Masher Avdu B'hem B'farach. So in the beginning, the first kind of work was B'chaymer Uvilvenim, that they had to do work with making all the bricks. But L'B'Sayif, that at the end, B'chol Avodah Basada. Then the work didn't get easier, right? It got even harder, and they had to do all this kind of farmhand work and the like. And the pasuk concludes, "Es kol avodas masher avdu b'hem b'farach." All of the work that they made them do, right, in a very difficult and challenging environment. Amar Rabbi Shmuel Nachman and Rabbi Yonasan, Shahayu machalifim melechas hanashim lenashim, melechas nashim la'anashim. Right. So essentially, what does it, the second befarach mean? That it was very difficult work, right? We already discussed bricklaying, we already discussed farmhand work. So the next kind of work that they made them do was they also changed up the kind of work that men do and gave that to women, and the kind of work that women do and gave that to men. And why is that difficult? Because obviously women cannot do men work and men cannot do women's work. And I put that obviously with quotation marks. And I thought that here will be a good place to go off on a tangent to say this is considered here in this Gemara as the apex of the terrible work that was given in Mitzrayim. Right? You want to know what the second befarach is? You want to know how bad the work was? the men had to do women's jobs, the women had to do men's jobs. So fast forward to today, and you have men who are doing women's jobs, staying at home, taking care of the kids, and all of this, and you have women who are doing men's jobs. They're out there in the workforce and doing all of that. According to the Gemara, this would seem to be the height of terrible times. In the height of terrible times, in what sense? The Gemara is saying it's mashma b'farach. The simple terribleness is what? Is that the work is too hard. That would be the simple understanding. That's what it would seem to me. But perhaps, given especially that today we see there are many women who are quite happy to be doing the men's work, and certainly some men seem to be quite happy to do the women's work, and maybe it's not so terrible. So then, what could befarach mean that it's so difficult, it's so challenging? So I was thinking maybe in a more homiletic way that the challenge is not the befarach in the sense of how terrible it is uh, in a sort of obvious manner, but rather terrible in the sense that fundamentally men are not to be doing women's jobs, and vice versa, women are not to be doing men's jobs. Because what is the problem if a woman does a man's job, which is even more of a problem than a man doing a woman's job? Fundamental problem is that a woman has to leave the house and she has to go do things that are external to her home. So the Rambam writes in Hilchos Ishus, Paragraph Gimel Halacha Yud Aleph, that a husband should prevent his wife from going out more than once or twice a month. Yes, it's true, a man has to let his wife go to her family events. So the Rambam writes, a man, should not prevent his wife from going to life cycle events, right? Sometimes Avelis, sometimes Memishta. So he should allow her to do that. But fundamentally, he should attempt to otherwise not allow her out of the house more than once or twice a month. Why? Because the covet of a woman is to be bizavas base on the corner of her home, called Kluda Basmelach Panimo. The Rambam is brought down in Halach and Shulchan Aruch, and Evan Ezer, Siman Ein Gimel, Halach Aleph. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't bring it down. Actually, it brings down the other part of the Rambam that talks about how she has to be dressed in terms of wearing a shawl and the like. But the Ramah adds in on, which is really a quote from the Rambam over there, and the Ramah adds on, and shouldn't be allowing her to go out more than once or twice a month. That's the Ramah adding in over there in terms of minig Ashkenaz, which presumably was for sure also the minig in Sfarad. So you would imagine. What is the basis of this medrash? What is the basis of this Rambam? Where did the Rambam get the idea that you're not supposed to be letting your wife go out more than once or twice a month? So the Kesef Mishnah points out, the Gemara points out over there on the Rambam, and also on Shulchan Aruch, the Gemara points out that the sources of this must be from the various midrashim. The midrashim call a woman who goes out of the house a yatsanis, or otherwise known as a pardonis, depending on which medrash you look at. That means going out is looked at very negatively. Over there on the Rambam, the Meiser Kaf writes that this is 100% of the Rambam is correct, and he says that b'frat b'deiros elu in our generations, where we see be'inayim how terrible the dir is, we should be enforcing this Rambam. And as I said, the Rambam brings it down lahalacha. The medrash that the Rambam are basing himself on, one is from this week's parsha. We have a whole parsha of the Nair who goes out. Says the medrash, that's where the problems happen. She was not in her house. That's how the whole issue resulted. If she had been in her house, the problem would have never had taken place. The Medrash says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had the option to create Chava from Adam's nose, from his hands, from every part of his body. Could have created Chava from his legs. Why did he not? So the Gemara says he could have created Chava from his raglayim, but decided not to because she'd be a yatzanis. So instead, he creates Chava from the tzela, like an internal organ. So she should be a tsanua and quiet, and says the Medrash, but none of it worked. All what they say, the best laid plans of mice and men, this is about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Nevertheless, she remains a yatsanis. And the Medrash is not saying it complimentary, right? And we see two famous figures in Bereshis, women who are considered yatsanises or yatsaniyos. Who are they? Leah, the pasuk says about Tate, Leah. When did Leah go out? After with the Dudam sale, she bought the night with Yaakov. The pasuk says about Tate Leah likraseh vatomer elai tavoy ki sachar secharticha b'yudai b'ni. And then, of course, you have in Paras Vayishlach, Tate Dina Bas Yaakov Lerois Bivnoi Saaret. There you go. Says the Medrash. That's the problem. Tate. To be at Yatsanis is a fundamental problem. She should be at home. She should be staying at home. Why is she going out? It's a pirza to leave. Again, you have to go out to some life cycle events. Okay. You go out once or twice a month, max. So I'm suggesting to you that this Gemara is telling us that the reason why I was befarach is not necessarily per se that the work was so hard. Although I was once witness as a child, ingrained in my memory, that my father was trying to change one of my 8 siblings' diapers. My mother wasn't home, and the baby had made, I guess a normal amount, but seemed an unbelievable amount then. And it took like a half an hour. And we were having to, get paper towels and tissues, and he had no idea what he was doing. And we were trying to help, and it was, this has never happened in my home. I've changed hundreds and hundreds of diapers, and there doesn't seem to be any problems. So what then does Befarach mean? Befarach could mean in this more homiletical way that I'm saying, which is, it's not per se that the work is so hard, but it could be Befarach that it is that Avodas Parach to change the makeup of how the work ought to be divided. Maybe that's what the Gemara is referring to. I'm not getting into halacha l'maisa whether or not it applies today or how much it should apply today, other than to leave you with 2 more things. One is a tshuva from Moshe Sternbach. Zol gesund sein, chelik dal, reish tzadi tes, ben yonei tznias habayis. One of my favorite tshuvas on this topic. He brings down the Rambam lahalacha, and he is shocked how women are able to go to a misrad and work as a mazkira. How could a woman be a secretary in an office? A woman is a secretary in an office. She's the yatsana. She's going to have all these problems. The boss is going to be an apotropos, ain't apotropos for our rights. What is going on here in this world today? He says that tznias hiyayisoid b'chinuch habanais v'amoid l'kedushas am Yisrael u'bizmaneinu anisyonis gedolim ha'oid v'alkarchoch tzrichim siyag achar siyag v'geder achar geder l'hamin atznias v'toiv oisa b'zeh l'havi adinim v'anhagish v'nahago b'hem b'nais Yisrael atznuis. That's what we have to do. And every man, every husband, every father needs to ensure that his daughters are not going out. And the Medartikin have a minig limnoya seisha oteis bachot kisha adima sifasteha beoifen boilet, right? To let him go out when she's going to wear makeup, it's a terrible thing because you are essentially inviting all these kinds of issues. This is the Shuvah Moshe Sternbach, who is a member of the Eidah Charedis, but I pointed out to you that from back in the day, I gave you a placard from the wall where Rabusha Freund, I'm not explaining if you don't know who he was, you know who he was. I happen to have connections to him in a variety of ways. So he very much, according to Eidah Charedis, very much wanted all the Yerushalmis, women, but every woman, but especially those who are living under the Eidah Charedis, to be wearing a shawl. Next time you go to Meir Sharm, you'll know that this is from him. It says it's going to be a good zech if it's neshama. It's going to give nachas ruach and elam haba, and they put out that sign there. And quoting the Rambam and the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch that we just quoted, that is, if you're going to have to go out, there'll be atzanas. At least go out in the way that would the ideal be, according to the Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, Ramah, which is to be wearing the redid, to be wearing these kinds of shawls that would be more tzenua. All right, so maybe that is an understanding of what befarach could be. Again, I'm not 100% certain that is the pshat in this Gemara. I think the pshat is more likely that the work was incredibly difficult to switch the jobs. But as I said, from current experience, at least in terms of my changing diapers, giving baths, doing bedtime, I don't have any problems doing it. I enjoy it. And from people I speak to, it seems not to be so difficult. And many wives work outside the home. Again, the post-Zoom era, maybe not as much, but pre-Zoom for sure. And didn't seem to be too many problems. In fact, to the contrary, many women prefer to be out. So, all right. We are now about 3 lines down from the wide lines of the Gemara. Lamand Omar Nami Hasam Beferach. According to Manda Omar, remember we have two psukim that says Befarach, right? One pasuk said Vidu Es Bnei Yisrael Befarach, and one said I call Vados Masher Avdu B'Ham Befarach. So one Befarach could be understood Beperach, right? With a soft mouth to convince the Jews to go to work. So the Gemara explains that even according to that, that the initial befarach is to be sweet and nice and get into work. You pay them and you make it a public good and all of that. This second befarach, is called Avodas Masha of the Ben Befarach, had to be crushing, it had to be challenging, it had to be something that was difficult. Again, we've just now spent some time trying to explain what that difficulty was. Either was the literal difficulty of men doing women's job and vice versa, or is in the Befarach, as I'm saying it, that it was very challenging for the Jewish people to be having women going out and the like. Darsha Bavir, Zati Gemara, Bischar Noshim Tzidkaniyos, Shahayu Ba'isi Adar, with the schar of the women, tzaddikises of that generation, Nigalu Yisrael Mitzrayim, the Jewish people was zeichet to the Geula in Egypt. What's that? When they went out to go and draw water. I guess that was either part of a woman's job, or I always thought water carriers was a man's job. But in Africa, certainly find a lot of women water carriers. Nevertheless, they used to go out and draw water. So Hashem would prepare little fish that they would be able to pick up when they were putting in the pitchers of the water. I always think of this as the source, perhaps as a matter of pshat. The pasuk tells us in Parashat Baloischa, we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt for free. What do you mean for free? Why was it for free? What's the word in freeness? Right? If you're a slave, nothing's free, everything's owned. But if you're going to get water and you're getting fish in your barrel, in your pitcher, so that's what it means free. And it didn't come from the Egyptians, it just came from when they were getting water, which presumably they were allowed to get. Yeah. So when we get so much fish, they would mamish have half the pitcher of water, half the pitcher of the fish. And they would fill up two kinds of pitchers. One would be warm water, Rashi says, to wash their husband's feet. And the other pitcher was in order to eat, right? They were pescatarians. They were eating fish. Yeah, and they would bring out these pitchers to the field, and they would wash their husbands, and they would anoint them, and they would give them to eat and to drink. They would have intimacy over there. Ben Shabbatayim is sort of like in the hedges between the fields that will be blocked off in the Mokim Tsanua. That is what happened. That's what means the schus of the notion of Tzidkani is nigalu, because if not for that, right, the natural, if you look in history, the natural reaction when there are trying times is to have less children, not to have more children. So when the Jewish people in Mitzrayim are in the middle of Avdus and they're having way more children than they would have otherwise normally had, it's an unbelievable reaction. It's contrary to human nature, right? Human nature is going to try to save oneself, and you're not saving oneself by bringing on more problems and more issues and more things that you have to care about in the middle of trying times. That's why during the Holocaust, it's very rare to have a child being born. It was totally contrary to human nature. And over here, with being in the middle of a big avdus, totally contrary to human nature to be having children. The reason they had the children was not because of the men. The men were tired, bone tired from doing all the work. They weren't interested. And we'll see more details on how the non-interest was on that base. But the woman said, no, we're going to continue and we're going to procreate. And so they did it in a manner by essentially getting the husbands to be interested in this manner by taking care of their needs by going out, as it were, to do so. Says the Gemara, Shene'emar, the pasuk tells us in Tishkavu Men Shabbatayim, B'schar Tishkavu Men Shabbatayim, because of the schar they had of being intimate there in the fields, Zochu Yisrael Lebizas Mitzrayim. That's how they were zecha to get all the booty from Mitzrayim at Yam Suf Shnemer Kanfa Yonin Nechma V'Kesef Ve'Averseh B'Irak V'Koretz. Right, the wings of the dove. I mean, the Jewish people are compared to the dove. They're covered in silver, like the pinions of it, B'Irak V'Koretz, like a type of gold. So that is the Chazal's understanding of the schus of the woman getting to this level. Now, I want to point out that there's another version of this Medrash, which is found in Tanchuma, also Bereshis Rabbah, Parashas Pekudei there in Tanchuma, Tes. So the Medrash over there says a different version of this. It also says the Schar Nashim said Kanias Negalu, and the version of the Medrash over there is that the woman used various mirrors. In order to entice the husbands, they would look in the mirror and say, "I'm prettier than you," and the husband said, "No, I'm handsomer than you." And that was sort of a flirtatious kind of a thing. I'm not sure that works, but nevertheless, the Medrash says that it was very efficacious and enabled them to procreate. And as a result, this the schar of these women that enabled the Jewish people to have a kiyum, and they took these mirrors, and the Pasuk tells us they're in Parashas Vayakhel, and brought these mirrors to Moshe Rabbeinu to give them as a donation to the Mishkan. The Pasuk over there says that the woman came and they gave the mirrors, B'maros hatzovos asher tzavu pesach ha'omayim. And Moshe Rabbeinu says the Medrash was mayos on this Nadava. And he was like, I don't want these mirrors. They were used for the Yetzer Hara. And Hashem said, no, Chavivim olai min hakol. These mirrors are more precious to me than every other gift that was given to the Mishkan. Use these mirrors. And so Moshe Rabbeinu used the mirrors. And the mirrors were used for the kiyar. The kiyar, of course, was used by the Kahanim every day in their ablutions, to be able to wash their hands and feet before they came and do the avodah. But there was another major use of the kiyar, as we have been learning, and that is for the Sotah. And it was not lost on the Medrash that this kiyar, which is built on the mirrors, that shows you the unbelievable love that these husbands and wives had for each other, that is going to be reminded to the Sotah when she comes to drink after a kiyar and a stira, the beginning of the water from the kiyar. They're going to be reminding her, telling her, screaming to her, like, hello, this is what an ideal marriage is meant to be. Right? Not what we saw already before. You makashetas yourself for this, you were doing your reichech this, you were doing your erfshit. Well, no, this is the appropriate way. The mirror there stands as a stark reminder of what ideal shalom bayis is. It stands there in the mikdash to remind to all soitas that they should, and to all women who would come there, as to what ideal shalom bayis ought to be. I should just point out that is according to Rashi. According to Rashi, that is what the Maris HaTzevis are, but the Onkelos and the Ibn Ezra, they don't agree. Maris HaTzevis, according to them, is not from women who were giving the mirrors that they used in Egypt, giving them to the Mishkan as a donation. That wasn't what the mirrors were from. According to the Targum and according to the Ibn Ezra, those mirrors were from women who came asher tzavu pesach ha'omayim. Look at the pasuk, right? In terms of the pasuk, you have to see that the Ibn Ezra has a better pshat than the Medrash in terms of the words of the pasuk, right? It says b'maris hatzevos, they gave them the mirrors from the woman asher tzavu, which means that they gathered pesach ha'omayim. Why are the women gathering pesach ha'omayim? I understand the maris, where they came from. It's very nice. But what do you mean, Asher Tzavu Pesach Ha'omayim? Why are they gathering outside the Elmayim? You hear the question? That's what the Targum and the Ibn Ezra are bothered by. So they say, what does it mean, Atzevais? It means that they were gathering outside the Elmayim to learn, to daven. They were gathering to hear Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah. And they no longer wanted to use their mirrors to be Mizyapais, says the Ibn Ezra. Unlike the common desire of a woman wakes up in the morning and looks in the mirror, these women say, no, we're going in the morning to go learn. We're going to go daven in the Mishkan. We don't need our mirrors anymore. And so they gave them up. And that is the mirrors that were used. Is not a reminder of intimacy, but a reminder we don't need intimacy. We have intimacy with the Rebbeinu Shalom, a very ascetic kind of reminder than of what the kiyar is, as opposed to Rashi, with what kind of a lesson the mirror is sending in terms of intimacy and Shalom Bayis. Look at the very fundamental differences. We are going to come back to this Ibn Ezra and maybe to the Rashi again when we do Chaf Aleph, when we discuss the four types of people that are the Mishnah later on Chaf, when we talk about the Breitzi Isha B'Kav Tiflos Mites Kabin of Precious, we'll get to the Isha Prusha, which is one of the four of the Mavalia Olam. We'll get to that later when we get to Chaf. Okay, now we got to move. Zog the Gemara. Where are we up to? We are in the wide lines, about 7 or 8 lines down. The pasuk says that the kavan, so we just said kanfe yoyna dechba b'kesef ever said birak rakharetz. The kavan shemis abrois. So then the woman became pregnant. So boys leboteim. They came to their homes. The kavan shem, right, meaning they were out. Remember, they were out and about when they were, with their husbands, getting the water, doing all of this. So now they're home. They're pregnant, so they have to be home. The kavan shem is not hence when they come time to giving birth. They actually go out and give birth in the field. Remember, there was the Gezerah Mitzrayim to kill all the boys, so they would try to hide their pregnancies as much as possible. When it came time to give birth, they would try to hide the babies. So they would give birth in the field, under the apple tree. That reminds us, of course, of the pasuk in Shirashim, Shneimar, right? Underneath the apple tree is where I first got excited, as it were, about the Jewish people over here. Not necessarily how it was meant in Shir Hashirim, but essentially what we're saying is the tremendous chus of these women to become pregnant, to give birth. They did it, they did it to hide away from the Egyptians, and they did it outside in the fields. And Hashem sent angels, as it were, from on high. Mishem mankir umashbir. And somebody's going to clean and prepare the babies. Like a regular midwife, Shem Shaperes Savlat, that prepares the baby. Shenemar, right? That when you're giving birth, on the day you give birth, like Karas there's nobody there to cut your umbilical cord. There was nobody there to wash you, to cleanse you, to do all that. So, in other words, the woman had to give birth. They had to, sort of running for their lives. They had to be, they were in danger. If the Egyptians found them, they could kill them, kill the babies, whatever. It was not a simple situation. So they would get pregnant, go out in a hiding, give birth, but then sort of abandon the babies out there and leave them. So how did the babies get taken care of? Hashem sent angels from on high to wash and to care for these kids. And they prepared 2 rocks, echad shel shemen and echad shel dvash, that the babies were able to suck on, because they couldn't nurse from their mothers were not around. They had to, be again in hiding, these kids. So, and we learned this out from the pasuk, Shneimar v'yenikeu dvash misela v'shemen mechal mistzur, right? Dvash comes from the rock, and the shemen from the tzur, right? So this is the source for the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was, as it were, taking care of these babies who were born, but they had no one to care for them. So now, when the Egyptians realized that there are all these kids that are being born in the fields and being left there, and they're surviving, so the Egyptians came to kill them. The kids had another nace done for them. Not only are they getting taken care of by angels, but they are now swallowed up by the earth. So the Egyptians were not happy. Where are all these kids that they heard about? So they brought cows, oxen, and they were plowing on the fields to try to plow them up. And they did not catch them. Right? They were mamish plowing on top of plowing to be able to get at them. But nevertheless, they were hidden away deep down in the bowels of the earth, and they did not get caught. However, after the Egyptians left, they would sprout forth again like the grass of the field. Again, this is all sort of I got it to show you that how the Jews managed to be able to survive and to thrive and to grow into such a big nation despite all of the challenges against them that were arrayed by the Egyptians. Says the pasuk Shneimar Revava Ketzamach Hasodeh Nisatich. Right, the pasuk we say this by the Haggadah that they grew like the grass of the field. Right, once these kids got up to an age when they were able to take care of themselves, they came mamish like flocks to their homes. Read it, the pasuk as saying Adri Adarim. They came like in flocks. There were so many kids, and they were like flocks of sheep, like coming back to their parents. וכשנגלה הקדוש ברוך הוא על הים, and when HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself to the Jewish people on the water during Kriyas Yamsuf, everybody remembers the famous medrash of right Ras Shivcha al Yam Mashalei Ras Yechezkel ben Muzi. Right, even a maidservant saw greater things than Yechezkel, who saw the Ma'aser Merkava. So by the Kriyas Yamsuf was a tremendous escalas of Shechina. So Haim Hikiru Tchila, these children, male children, they were the ones who needed it the most. They recognized Hashem first. Shene'emar, Zek Keli Vanveu, the pasuk there in Parashat Shmos. This is our God, and right, we will honor Him. They recognized Him because, as it were, they had been protected and saved and nourished by Hakadosh Baruch Hu, as it were, in a way that no one else does. Most people have a human mother that takes care of them, but they were directly from Hashem, from these angels. Fine. Continues the Gemara. So this is again going back to another pasuk in Parashat Shmos. That Melech Mitzrayim says to the Miyaldos, what does he say to them? Rav Ushmuel, Chad Amar Isho Bita, Chad Amar Kalavachamoisa. Right. So it's a question of who were these Miyaldos, who were these midwives. According to one opinion, it was a mother and a daughter team. According to the other one, it was a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law team. Madam Ishu Bita, according to the Madam who says it was a mother and daughter team. Who was the mother and daughter? Yocheved and Miriam. Madam Kal V'Chamaisa Yocheved and Elishav. According to the Madam that says that it was a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law team, was Yocheved and Elishav. Elishav is the wife of Aaron. Elishav Bas Aminadav, and that was the tag team for the midwives. It says the more Tanya Kimadam Ishu Bita. We have a brisa that sounds like it's the mother and daughter team. The Tanya. Because the pasuk says Shifra, right? The names of the midwives were after Shema Achas Shifra, V'Shema Hashem is Pua, right? Those were the names. So what is the price of proof that it was the mother and daughter team? So it says the Gemara, the Tanya, we have a price that says Shifra, so Yecheved. Shifra is really Yecheved. V'Lam Nikar Shema Shifra. What's she called Shifra for? Shema Shaperes es Havlan, like we said before, that we said by the main Mara, Mishem Mankir Mashpir Aisan, right? Somebody who prepares the child, Kechayazu, like a midwife. So why was she called Shifra? Because she prepared the child. Davar Acher, Shifra Shapar V'Ravu Yisrael B'Yamel. Why was she called Shifra? Because Jewish people had tremendous growth. They were like Para V'Ravu. So Shifra is coming from the word Para. They had a tremendous growth in her days, in part because of the fact that they refused to kill the male children. Pua zu Miriam. Pua is Miriam. Why is Pua called Miriam? Here, I love the beautiful Rashi. What does it mean? Pua, Rashi says, and then in about halfway down the narrow lines, Shaisa Pua Lavlad, Mishasha says that she would play with him. Like the way we play with little children, Mitzvarim Maravim, like a sweet nothing, sweet words. L'shasha to play with them, right? So she was Pua because one shot is she was talking sweetly, murmuring, noodling. I forget the exact. What's the word I'm looking for? Cuddling. No, there's a word in English. I'm forgetting the word. That she would do this with the kids to keep them calm. Remember, again, the Egyptians are all around. Davar Acher, another pshat on what Pua is. Pua shoyisa Pua Barach HaKedesh. Right, she would again be muttering, but here not the sweet nothings to the kids to keep them calm, but rather she was kept on constantly muttering, Baruch HaKodesh v'Imeres Asida Imi Sheteled Bein Mashiach Yisrael. My mother is going to give birth to the Mashiach Shal Yisrael. All right, next pasuk. Vayomer bi'aletchen es evriyos u'isan al ha'avnoyim. So the Gemara says, "My avnoyim." What does it mean, avnoyim? Avnoyim sounds like a rocks. What do you mean? What are the Jewish people giving birth? Pari is telling them to the Mialedes, Reisen alav noim in bein huva mitenoi serve in basiva choya. So what did he mean of noim? What does it mean? Rav Chanan Simon Gadol Muscle, and he gave them a big simon. Amalet Mishasha Karas Lele. When a woman is going to be prepared to give birth, when she's mamish, on the birthing chair and she's mamish about to give birth, you want to know how you're going to know? Her thighs are going to become cold like stones. So I looked it up according to Google. This is actually not a unheard of reaction. There are women, not just because of an epidural, there are women who have major changes, in terms of the body, the baby's giving birth, and sometimes they do experience tremendous coldness in their thighs. So that was a simon gadol that he gave. You want to know when they're ready to give birth? If they start saying that they're very cold on their feet, then you know that that is a sign. Viz Damar, another potential understanding of what it means of noyim is the kedusah ve'ered beis hayotzer. If you go to the potters, factory, he does work on the avnaim. Again, my yotzer is yerech mikan v'yerech mikan v'sadim b'em. So just like the potter, he has one leg here, one leg here, and he has his potter's wheel in the middle. The afisha yerech mikan v'yerech mikan v'havlad be'emtza. Same sort of a thing. Yeah, in bein hu v'amiteno isai v'im b'asiv achaya. Right, if it's going to be a male child, then you kill him. The next part of the pasuk, right? A woman child is able to live. Amar Chanina, that simon gadol masalan. He gave him a big simon to explain what does it mean that you're going to have a male child that you're going to be able to kill. You're going to have to do a quick job before the mother realizes. You have to say it was a nefal, it was a stillborn. How are you going to do it? Ben panav lamata, as Rashi says, kederach tashmishay. Bas panel lamayla kederach tashmisha sa. Whereas the Medrash says each one looks at what they came from, right? The man came from the earth, the woman came from the man. Or as Rashi just noted, I just quoted you another Medrash about why it is like this. Now, if anybody has done a Google search, you will know that this is not correct scientifically. Boys are not born with their heads down, or vice versa. Girls are not born with their heads up. It's entirely incorrect. So you have to look at the Sefer HaBris. Sefer HaBris, unbelievable scientific work and dealing with Chazal, etc. One of the most popular works, literally in the late 17, early 1800s. The Sefer HaBris writes that the Gemara is correct, but the times have changed. This is how it used to be. It is no longer like this. Again, it will be hard to imagine that he gave them a big sign and that no one ever did any scientific testing to say, like, hey, is that actually true? No one asked any midwives. Don't know. In any event, that's what the Sefer Bris says, is that, of course, it was like that during times of Chazal, but it's not like that anymore. So the Gemara, Vatiran Amiyalde says, right? So the Pasuk says they didn't listen. But the Gemara asks the question, Lohen mibayale. What does the pasuk say? Kasha dibra alehen melech Mitzrayim. It should have said Lohen. Alehen is mashma, something of more intimacy. Says the Gemara, Amar Beis Rabbi Chanina, Melamed shetoven ledvar avera v'lo nitbu. He was in fact attempting to act inappropriately with them. That's why it says alehen rather than Lohen. Kasha dibra Lohen. But they, of course, did not allow that to have any fruition. So the Pasuk there concludes that the Chayan and let the kids live. They kept the boys alive. Tana. So the Rashi notes that it could have said V'lohim Nisa, right? That they didn't kill them. What do you mean by the Chayan? They made them alive. Sounds like they didn't just not let them die. They mamish gave them extra to make sure that they lived. So Loi Dayan Shlohim Nisa, it wasn't simply enough that they didn't get them killed, that they didn't kill them. Al Shayim Speakers and mine wasn't. They prepared food and water to make sure that these kids will be able to survive. So when the delivery is snatchless of the miyaldes to explain to Pari why is it that these women are not dying, so they said to Pari, they're like these animals, they give birth and they are just somehow, able to do it before you even get there. So the Gemara explains, my fire. What do you mean they're like animals? If you're going to say that they're mamish, not animals, but in this case, midwives, literal midwives. Does a midwife, when she gives birth herself, not need another midwife to help her? Right? You remember the Gemara in Brachas, hey, right, about right? Everybody needs help. Just because you're a great person doesn't mean if you yourself are in trouble, you don't need help. Everyone needs help at certain times. Rather, what they said to Paro is that this nation is like a bunch of animals. Yehuda Gor Aryeh he done Nachash Naphtali Aryeh Al Shalucha Yisachar Chamar Garm Yosef B'Charshar Binyamin Zev Yitrayv. Right, every one of these shvatim are compared to animals. Says the Gemara, Ksiv Bei. Yes, by the shvatim that are compared specifically to animals, then okay, it's clear. Who like Ksiv Bei, and when it's not written that they're specifically a shevet is compared to an animal, like Ruvain, let's say, right? So then what are you going to say? No, nevertheless, even by them, it's still considered that they're like animals. Ma imcha, lovey ben arayas right? Like your mother is a lioness who's between the lions, she's crouching. In other words, all the Jews have this quality. Animals don't need midwives to give birth. So too the Jews don't need help in order to be able to give birth. Let's just finish up the Gemara. The Gemara says, right? Because they were so fearful of Hashem that didn't kill his kids, they gave them to live. So Hashem made them houses. That was the tzchus. Rav Shmuel Chanam Batei Kahuna Levia. One says it was a Batei Kahuna Levia. There was zechet to houses of Kahuna and Levia. V'Chanam Batei Malchus. Matar Batei Kahuna Levia. Right, the Pashup shot. If it's but there was zechet to Kahuna Levia is who Aaron and Moshe. Right, so they got Batei Kahuna Batei Levia. Not Miriam, but Yocheved got Batei Kahuna Levia. Right. So that would be the tzchus. Matar Batei Malchus, and according to Madam, it says Batei Malchus. So that's Batei Malchus of David. Right? That how do we know? Because Nami Miriam Kasi, right? Malchus David has a connection to Miriam. The Siva Thomas Azuba Eshes Kalev, right? Azuba died, his wife Kalev Ikach like Kalev Sefrat, Batel Eschur, but Siva David ben Ish Efrati. So we connect that. So therefore, the woman had this chus. These two women, either Batikun Levia or Bate Malchus. Again, if it's Bate Malchus, then it connects even Yocheved and Miriam to it. Batikun Levia. Miriam is not necessarily, from the Batikun Levia, but nevertheless, Yocheved was. All right, let's stop here.